This video is intended to get you through painting your first models. I'll go over some basic techniques and, well, show you how I paint a model very basically. Now, if you've seen my other video, which you should watch, on basic hobby supplies that you'll need to get started, there is a secret third source of models that are very cheap, that are great for new D&D players. Those being the Sweatshop Minis. Wizards of the Coast and Piezo, for D&D and Pathfinder respectively, produce these, and they're very cheap. And they suck because they're made in sweatshops by children, and I know for a fact that you can paint way better than sweatshop children, even if you've never painted before. Now, something great about these models is they're pre-primed, so you don't need to prime them. But if you were to prime a model, you would thin down, brush on primer, and paint it very lightly over the entire model as to not obscure detail. Or you would take it outside and spray it with a rattle can. Use some sticky tack to attach to something you can hold away from you as you spray it. First step, use a hobby knife to clean away all major sources of mold lines. You'll see me doing it here. Anything that really sticks out. There'll be some left over on the model. That's okay, just the ones that'll catch people's eye. It'll chip the paint, it'll show like black plastic underneath. It won't look very good now, but it'll be all covered up. So you'll generally want to cut away from yourself, but I will say you will have more control if you cut towards yourself. Not saying that you should, but that's just a factoid I know. I know I've cut myself accidentally a lot using hobby knives, so do be careful with them. They can leave pretty good gashes. Now this is generally a good step to take with any models. I know some people leave mold lines on. That upsets me greatly. Please at least get rid of the very noticeable ones up top. Alright then, so we'll do some super basic basing while we're at it as well. So you can take some PVA glue, so Elmer's glue, spread it down on a model, and then do a drop of super glue in. Super glue hardens when in contact with air. So the PVA has this weird reaction with it, and if you take it can be anything, a toothpick or the end of a paper clip, you can mush it and spread it around to make it look like weird, gross, alien Earth, or a giant pile of spit and goo, which is the case for this model. And with that too, you can also stick the model right on there, and it will be stuck to the base very nicely. A much better connection than it had originally. Alright, model's already based, the base is dry, time to get started. We take some mulled berry and thin it with a little bit of water. See? Now, I was always told you want it to be like skim milk, and I'm not gonna lie, I have no idea what skim milk looks like. Basically, you want there to be enough pigment so that it covers, but it doesn't need to cover fully, right? So, jeepers, I guess I just have to resort to skim milk. We're gonna paint this all over the mushroom cap, and then we're gonna let it dry. However, we can work on a different part of the model while it's drying. So we're gonna take some necrotic flesh, thin it down once again, and paint that all over the body. Get all over the body, get everywhere. It's okay if you're a little messy, you still have the mulled berry on your palette. You can go back and correct any mistakes you made. It's all good. Now at this point you'll see, both the colors are a little splotchy, and the original base purple is still showing through. That's okay. Once each coat is dry, you're going to do a second coat of the same color onto the model. 2 thin coats is the golden rule of painting. It's talked about a lot, and it's very true, because you don't obscure very much detail at all by doing that, and you get pretty decent coverage generally. So I did that off screen, but for base coats, always do 2 thin coats. Alright, time for some highlights. So we're going to take some Mage Cast Magenta and mix it into our mulled berry. Now, play around with ratios to your heart's content. I know people like specific instructions. I did like a half a drop of the Mage Cast Magenta into maybe 2 parts of the mulled berry, because the magenta is very strong and it will make the mulled berry brighter on its own. So, to put it on properly, I turned my brush sideways and dragged it up and down, making sure that I didn't get into those deep holes that are on the mushroom. I'm not quite sure what they're called, but I want those to remain dark. We want the shadows to be darker than the, well, parts that are touching light. So here I did some wet blending, where I took some Mage Cast Magenta, mixed it into my mix, much stronger, and made sure it was very heavily put on the top. And then, because the layer I just put on was still wet, I kind of dragged that layer down a little bit and allowed it to mix, so it made a smooth gradient between the 2 layers. It's called wet blending. It's a useful technique for getting nice gradients, and it's very easy to do. Next, we take some necrotic flesh with matte white. Once again, a ratio of maybe 2 parts, 2 drops necrotic flesh to a half drop of matte white. And we're gonna splatter this all over the upper body. We're gonna leave the underside still the base color, because those are darker, they're in shadows. And then we're gonna let that dry. Then, once dry, we're gonna add in some more matte white, maybe another half drop into the mix, and highlight all the uppermost parts, so his rump and a bit of his back, as well as the face. It's generally a good rule of thumb with models, even if they're shaded a little bit, to highlight the face, because people will be drawn to that kind of naturally. Alright, next we're going to take some crystal blue, drop it onto our palette, and pull out an old worn brush. And we're going to do some dry brushing. Now this is another basic technique that is excellent. It works well for fur, and it will work well for this mushroom cap. So we're going to dip our brush in the paint, and then with a paper towel wipe most of that paint off of the brush. And then we're going to drag our brush over the model, and, well, whatever parts we want to be highlighted, we'll highlight. So in the mushrooms case, I make sure the top is a very heavy blue, but then as it gets down to the base of the mushroom cap, I let it fade out a little bit. As you can see, this really brings out a lot of detail. Super useful. Next, we take oak brown for the base. We do 2 thin coats, nice and easy. Alright, time to pull out Wicked Pink, thin it down, and drop it very carefully into the eyes. Make sure your brush isn't overloaded. This is something you'll definitely have to practice. I got very lucky, and I guess I've also done it a lot, but I got it in there first try. I wasn't always this way, and it's okay. You certainly don't have to be either. So just take a little bit of that necrotic flesh mixed in with the matte white and clean up around the eyes once it's dry. It's okay. That's much easier than trying very hard to get it right first time. Alright, we mix in some desert yellow to our oak brown. Ratio, whatever you want. Quite honestly, I was just going Insano style at this point. And we do some splotching on the base, so not very carefully with our brush, just splotching it around, creating some texture. Then, we take some rainforest green and smother that onto the gross blob-looking thing on the ground. Now this enemy is pretty cool, it's a shrieker. So when adventurers disturb them, they just scream, triggering a bunch of random encounters. And for mine, I like to have them spit up a bit of goo, so people following them get stuck in it, making it hard for them to run away or run towards the shrieker to prevent it from screaming. I think it's a neat little monster. It's not inherently dangerous, but it can attract a lot of danger. Anyway, we do a bit of matte black on the rim. 2 thin coats once again. This really tidies up your model and makes it look good. You can always go back later too and add 1 more coat of matte black just before you're finalizing the model. Never a bad idea. But we'll take some strong tone, which is a wash, and smother that all over the base. Now, washes are kind of like an ink. Their whole thing is they kind of tint the model a certain color, and they find their way into the recesses of the models, the dark places, and create shadows. It's basically talent in a bottle. So I thin down the strong tone for the body and put it all over it. Look at that detail. And as you're looking at it, you'll see me soaking up the parts where there's too much strong tone pooling in one area. Be sure to sap it up with a clean brush so that nasty, weird, blotchy shadows aren't left behind. Some Druchii Violet is drudged up out of my paint bin for the mushroom part. And you can see me kind of dragging it down onto the head of the model. I figured it'd be a cool effect, but it didn't really turn out the best. And that's okay, we'll go back and correct it by taking our body highlights and kind of putting it where I didn't like the purple, looking too purple on the body. You make mistakes while painting, you gotta experiment though to get better. So in the future, I'll be a little more careful. We're going to go back to the body with our mix of necrotic flesh and matte white and highlight the rump once again, the back, and the face a little bit more. As well as we're going to take the dry brush back out and with the crystal blue, go back and make it brighter on the mushroom cap. I also take the other cap colors, so the mulberry and magenta, and work them back in until I have a nice ratio to blue, the other colors. Took a little bit of time, but I think it looks pretty good. Now, once the model is fully dry, completely dry, not wet at all, we take our matte varnish, and if you don't have an airbrush, which I don't expect you to, put a little bit on your palette and thin it down with clean water. Make sure the water is not dirty at all. And paint a thin layer, not too heavy, over everything. Yeah, and once the varnish is dry, I took the effect paint Oozing Vomit and slathered it all over the base, going really heavy on the weird snot pile on the ground. And look at him! He's done! Using some really easy painting techniques, we turned this model from to that's pretty dang good. You should paint models. It's fairly easy to do. You'll get better at it with time, and listen, even when your models are just you'll be the one to notice all the flaws, right? Your players, especially if they've never played with models before, will pick up even awfully painted models and admire them and go, whoa, you painted this? That's impressive. It is true. It's very good. And the more you do it, the better you'll get. So I hope this has encouraged some of you to pick up a brush and some paints and go to town on some models. And with that, I've been Sideshow Sam. Thank you for watching my video, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!